Some plane crash videos show only a few seconds, but behind those seconds is a much bigger story. In this video, we'll look at real aviation disasters caught on camera and break down the mistakes, failures, and critical moments that led to each one. This is not just footage of a plane crash. It's a closer look at how these accidents happen and why they still teach us about aviation safety. On January 3, 2022, at the Cable Airport in Upland, California, a light aircraft crashed during a go-around after the pilot encountered wake turbulence from a helicopter that was overtaxing near the runway. The NTSB found no pre-impact mechanical failure and determined that the loss of control was caused by the disturbed air from the helicopter. The lesson here is simple but important. Even at low speed and low altitude, helicopter downwash can be powerful enough to upset a small airplane, so spacing and wake awareness matter. On December 30, 2021, near Golden, Missouri, a recently purchased wave-shift aircraft crashed shortly after takeoff during aggressive low-altitude maneuvering, killing the pilot. Investigators found no mechanical failure and concluded the crash was caused by the pilot's loss of control while making steep turns and rapid pitch changes too close to the ground. The lesson is clear. Unfamiliar aircraft, abrupt handling characteristics, and low-level maneuvering leave almost no margin for recovery. On December 11, 2021, near Bermuda Dunes, California, a home-built airplane crashed just minutes after takeoff when the engine lost power and the pilot then exceeded the aircraft's critical angle of attack, leading to an aerodynamic stall and loss of control. Investigators found no mechanical problem that would have prevented normal operation and conclude that the power loss was likely caused by the fuel shut-off valve being left in an intermediate position that restricted fuel flow. The lesson is that even a small configuration error before takeoff can become fatal very quickly, especially when the pilot tries to stretch the climb instead of protecting airspeed. On December 5, 2021, in Medford, Oregon, a twin-engine aircraft crashed shortly after takeoff when the pilot lost control during the initial climb into low clouds. The NTSB determined that the accident was caused by spatial disorientation, which led to an uncontrolled descent, and investigators found no pre-impact mechanical failure that would have prevented normal operation. The lesson is that an instrument departure leaves almost no room for confusion. Once visual references disappear, precise instrument control and strong situational awareness become critical. On November 21, 2021, near Chadron, Nebraska, a twin-engine Cessna crashed about 30 seconds after takeoff in dark night conditions, killing the pilot and two passengers. Investigators found no mechanical failure and determined that the most likely cause was the pilot's incapacitation from an ongoing heart attack, which led to a loss of control at very low altitude. The lesson from this accident is that medical fitness can be just as critical as aircraft condition, because when a pilot becomes suddenly impaired just after departure, there may be no time left to recover. On November 21, 2021, at Old Bridge Airport in Old Bridge, New Jersey, A student pilot crashed during a solo pattern flight. After a bounce landing turned into a go-around and the airplane pitched up sharply, stalled, and descended to the runway. The NTSB found no pre-impact mechanical problem and determined that the accident was caused by the student pilot's loss of control during the go-around, which led to an aerodynamic stall. The lesson is that go-arounds demand discipline, pitch control, and airspeed protection, because at low altitude, even a small over-rotation can leave no time to recover. On November 14, 2021, at Mountain Air Airport near Burnsville, North Carolina, a Cirrus SR-22 crashed while attempting to land at the mountaintop airport after the pilot aborted the landing and lost control. The NTSB determined that the pilot failed to properly account for the high-density altitude and the tailwind during the approach, which led to an aerodynamic stall and impact with trees and a building. The lesson is that mountain airports leave very little margin for error, and density, altitude, wind, and terrain must be respected long before the flare begins. On November 13, 2021, in Sebring, Florida, a light aircraft crashed after the pilot lost control at low altitude and the airplane entered an aerodynamic stall. The NTSB determined that the pilot was operating the aircraft without a pilot certificate or flight training. And the lesson here is straightforward. At very low altitude, lack of training and poor decision-making can become fatal almost instantly. On October 28, 2021, at Ukiah Municipal Airport in Ukiah, California, a student pilot crashed during a go-around after the airplane suffered a power interruption for water-contaminated fuel. Investigators found that rainwater had entered through a leaking left fuel tank, and that damage inside the tank prevented the water from being drained during pre-flight, leaving the pilot with 2-liter margin at low altitude when the engine faltered. The lesson is that even a careful pre-flight can miss hidden contamination if the fuel system itself is compromised, so recurring tank leaks and drainage issues should never be treated as minor maintenance items. On October 14, 2021, near Wilton, California, a Vesica Mielek An-2 crashed shortly after takeoff when the pilot was unable to control the airplane's pitch and it descended into trees. The NTSB found that the pilot lost pitch control during departure, but the exact reason could not be determined because the airplane was so badly fragmented and damaged by fire that investigators could not identify a definitive pre-impact failure. The lesson from this case is that when a control anomaly appears right after liftoff, the margin for recovery is extremely small, which makes aircraft condition, loading, and control system integrity especially critical before every departure.
Oh my God. Oh my God, he's crashed it.
Okay. Okay, Henrik, come over here.
On October 8, 2021, near Atlanta, Georgia, a Cessna P-210 crashed just after takeoff. When it pitched sharply nose up, rolled left, and went inverted during the initial climb. The NTSB found that the pilot's seat was not properly secured before departure, likely slid aft during takeoff, and contributed to the loss of control, with the aircraft off center of gravity and the absence of a secondary seat stop making the situation worse. The lesson from this accident is that even a small cockpit setup mistake before takeoff can become catastrophic within seconds, especially when loading and seat lock security are not fully verified. On October 6, 2021, near Point Venture on Lake Travis, Texas, a Sea and Sky Crocker Cygnet crashed into the water during a local flight shortly after sunset. The NTSB determined that the accident was caused by the pilot's abrupt pitch-up in response to localized wind conditions, which led to an aerodynamic stall at low altitude and a fatal loss of control. The lesson from this case is that even light, shifting winds can become dangerous near terrain and water, especially in a slow-flying aircraft with very little altitude available for recovery. On September 29, 2021, at Orlando Apopka Airport in Apopka, Florida, a Tecnam P-92 Elite bounced on landing, veered right and was substantially damaged after the pilot attempted a go-around and the airplane departed the runway. The NTSB concluded that the accident was caused by a loss of directional control during landing, but the exact reason could not be determined because the event was reported too late for a more complete examination of the aircraft. The lesson here is that even a survivable runway control event can become much harder to understand later, which is why prompt reporting and careful post-accident preservation matter for both safety and prevention. On September 28, 2021, at Miami Executive Airport in Miami, Florida, a Robinson R-44 second lost control moments after landing, spun violently, lifted back into the air, and came down in an uncontrolled descent. The NTSB found no mechanical failure and concluded that the accident was caused by the pilot's loss of control after landing, with his lack of required training, endorsements, and recent experience in that helicopter type identified as a contributing factor. The lesson is that helicopter safety depends heavily on proficiency and compliance because even after touchdown, one incorrect control input can turn a routine landing into a serious accident. On September 9, 2021, near Provincetown, Massachusetts, a commuter aircraft crashed after touchdown when the pilot tried to abort the landing late in the rollout and no longer had enough runway left to safely go around. The NTSB said the approach had already become unstable and the delayed decision to reject the landing, along with the raining and a tailwind, turned the situation into a loss of control beyond the runway. The lesson from this accident is that once an approach is no longer stable, the safest choice is to go around early because waiting too long can remove every remaining margin. On August 20, 2021, during an airshow practice flight at Wilkes-Barre, Scranton International Airport in Pennsylvania, a vintage military trainer lost engine power just after takeoff, and the pilot was killed when the airplane stalled while turning for a forced landing. The NTSB determined that the engine suffered a partial power loss for undetermined reasons. But the fatal loss of control happened when the pilot exceeded the aircraft's critical angle of attack at very low altitude. The lesson from this crash is that after a power loss right off the runway, protecting the airspeed is often the only margin a pilot has left. On February 10, 2022, at Cherry Ridge Airport near Honesdale, Pennsylvania, a Cessna T-210N ran off the end of runway 36 after the pilot touched down well beyond the threshold during a landing in strong swirling gusts. The NTSB determined that the accident was caused by the pilot's failure to attain the proper touchdown point, which led to the runway overrun and collision with terrain. The lesson here is that on a short runway, a long touchdown in gusty conditions should be treated as a warning to go around immediately, because once too much runway is gone, braking alone may not save the landing. On February 19, 2022, in Newport Beach, California, a Huntington Beach Police Department helicopter crashed into the water during a low-altitude orbit while responding to a call. The NTSB determined that the pilot lost control after the helicopter encountered an anticipated right yaw during low-speed, tight radius maneuver, with distraction, fatigue, and limited outside visual cues contributing to the accident. The lesson from this crash is that low-altitude helicopter operations leave almost no margin for error, especially when workload, fatigue, and reduced visual references begin to stack up at the same time. On February 20, 2021, near Crete, Nebraska, a Mooney M-20C crashed during takeoff after it rotated too early, became airborne in a nose-high attitude, and then lost control before leaving the runway area. The NTSB found no pre-impact mechanical problem and determined that the accident was caused by the pilot's failure to maintain control during takeoff. The lesson is that forcing an airplane off the runway before it reaches proper flying speed can erase the safety margin in seconds, especially when control authority is still limited. On March 30, 2022, at Lampasas Airport in Texas, a Cessna 180 was substantially damaged after the pilot, dealing with gusty crosswinds, chose to depart from a perpendicular taxiway instead of the runway, and that could not clear the trees in the departure path. The NTSB found no pre-impact mechanical failure and determined that the accident was caused by that takeoff decision rather than a technical problem. The lesson is that trying to outsmart difficult wind conditions with an improvised departure can create a far greater hazard than the crosswind itself.